Moving to Willowbrook Estates seemed like the perfect fresh start. The neighborhood was pristine, with manicured lawns and houses that looked like they belonged in a magazine. What I didn't expect was Karen Mitchell, the HOA president who ruled the community with an iron fist wrapped in a fake smile. Karen was the type of woman who measured her neighbor's grass with a ruler and sent violation notices for dandelions. She had perfectly styled blonde hair that never moved in the wind, always wore pastel cardigans, and carried herself like she was running for mayor of the entire world. Her husband Rick seemed like a nice enough guy, always waving from his BMW as he left for work each morning. I should have known something was off when Karen introduced herself by handing me a 40-page HOA handbook and a magnifying glass. The first few months were peaceful enough. I followed the rules, kept my lawn trimmed to exactly 2 3/4 inches as specified in section 12.4 of the handbook, and painted my mailbox the approved shade of colonial blue. I even joined the monthly HOA meetings, thinking it would be nice to get involved in the community. That's when Karen's true nature revealed itself. During my third meeting, she stood up and cleared her throat with the authority of someone calling the Supreme Court to order. Karen, I discovered, was passionate about two things: maintaining property values and knowing everyone's business. "I've been observing our newest resident," she announced, her voice carrying that particular tone that could curdle milk. "And I have some concerns about the foot traffic at their residence." I looked around the room, confused. Foot traffic? I barely had any visitors except for the occasional delivery driver and my elderly neighbor Mrs. Peterson, who brought me cookies on Sundays. I've documented 17 separate occasions where individuals have visited the property, Karen continued, consulting a pink leather-bound notebook like she was presenting evidence to a jury. "This includes the mail carrier, the UPS driver, the grocery delivery service, and various other associates." The way she said associates made it sound like I was running some sort of underground criminal enterprise. Several neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their folding chairs. I tried to interject, but Karen held up her hand like a traffic cop. "Furthermore," she continued, "I've noticed that these visits often occur during unconventional hours. The grocery delivery arrived at 7:45 a.m. last Tuesday. The landscaping consultation was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon. This pattern suggests activities that may not align with our community standards." I finally managed to speak up. "Karen, those were all legitimate services. The grocery delivery was early because I had a work meeting. The landscaping consultation was on Saturday because that's when the company was available." Karen's smile could have powered a small city with its artificial brightness. "Oh, I'm sure there are explanations. But perception is reality in a community like ours. We must be above reproach." That should have been my first warning. But I'm an optimist by nature, and I figured once Karen got to know me better, she'd realize I was just a normal person trying to live quietly in the suburbs. I was wrong. So very, very wrong. The rumors started subtly. First, it was Mrs. Henderson from 3 houses down giving me strange looks when I checked my mail. Then the mailman started making awkward small talk about how popular my address was becoming. I didn't connect the dots until I overheard Karen talking to a group of neighbors at the community mailbox cluster. "Well, I'm not one to gossip," Karen was saying, which is universally code for "I'm absolutely about to gossip my heart out. But the constant stream of visitors is becoming quite noticeable. Different cars in the driveway at all hours. Men coming and going. It's just concerning for our family-friendly environment." The group of neighbors nodded like bobbleheads, hanging on every word. I watched from my window as Karen gestured dramatically toward my house, her voice carrying just far enough for me to catch phrases like questionable activities and property values. I decided to address this directly. The next morning, I knocked on Karen's door with a plate of homemade brownies and my best neighborly smile. "Karen, I think there might be some misunderstanding about the visitors to my house," I said when she answered the door. "I wanted to clarify that they're all service providers, delivery drivers, and the occasional friend or family member." Karen accepted the brownies with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh honey, I'm sure they are. But you have to understand, appearance matters in a community like this. When people see different men coming and going, well, minds wander. Different men? I asked, genuinely confused. The cable repair technician last month was quite handsome, Karen said with a knowing look. And that landscaper who gave you the consultation? Very attractive. And don't get me started on your grocery delivery driver. He's become quite popular with some of the other ladies in the neighborhood too. I stared at her, slowly realizing what she was implying. Karen, these are service professionals doing their jobs. Of course they are, dear, she said, patting my arm condescendingly. I'm just saying that in a tight-knit community like ours, we have to be mindful of how things look. Maybe consider consolidating your appointments to be less frequent? I left her doorstep feeling like I'd been hit by a truck made of passive-aggressive suburbia. The situation escalated quickly after that. Karen seemed to have appointed herself as the neighborhood's moral watchdog, and I was her primary suspect. She started timing my visitors with military precision, taking photos of license plates, and documenting every delivery truck that dared to enter my driveway. Karen had apparently never heard of online shopping or the gig economy, because she treated every Amazon delivery like it was a scandalous rendezvous. The breaking point came when she cornered me at the monthly H.O.A meeting with a PowerPoint presentation. Yes, she had actually created a slideshow titled Maintaining Community Standards, a case study. As you can see from slide 3, Karen announced to the packed community center, there have been 37 documented visits to this address in the past month alone. A photo of my house appeared on the projector screen, with red arrows pointing to my driveway like it was a crime scene. Slide 4 shows the variety of vehicles, including several luxury cars that don't belong to any residents in our community. The next image showed my driveway with different cars circled in red marker. I recognized my sister's Mercedes, my boss's Tesla, and my accountant's Audi among others. And slide 5, Karen continued with theatrical flair, demonstrates the pattern of visits occurring during traditional work hours, suggesting these are not typical social calls. I stood up, my patience finally exhausted. Karen, this is completely inappropriate. You're surveilling my home and making implications about my personal life based on completely normal activities. I'm simply documenting what's visible from public areas, Karen replied smoothly. And as HOA president, it's my responsibility to address behaviors that might impact our community's reputation. What behaviors? I demanded. Having my groceries delivered? Meeting with my accountant? Hosting my family for dinner? The room fell silent except for the hum of the projector. Several neighbors looked uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. Karen's smile was victorious. I think the evidence speaks for itself, she said. I'm recommending that we implement new visitor guidelines to ensure all residents are maintaining appropriate standards. That night, I called my lawyer. Not because I was planning anything dramatic, but because I wanted to understand my rights and options. What I learned was that Karen was walking a very thin line between acceptable HOA enforcement and harassment. The surveillance and public accusations could potentially constitute defamation, my lawyer explained. Especially if she's implying improper conduct without evidence. Document everything, and let me know if it escalates further. It escalated further. Karen's next move was to start a neighborhood watch program, which was really just a formalized gossip network with official-sounding language. She created a private social media group called Willowbrook Safety Patrol and began posting regular updates about suspicious activity in the neighborhood. I only learned about this when my neighbor Mrs. Peterson showed me screenshots on her phone. Dear, I think you should see what Karen's been posting, she said, her wrinkled face creased with concern. The posts were masterfully crafted to avoid direct accusations while heavily implying impropriety. Unusual traffic patterns observed on Maple Street. Multiple unknown males visiting same address. Residents advised to be vigilant. Another post read, Community Standards Reminder, all residents should consider how their activities might impact property values and neighborhood reputation. Each post had dozens of comments from other neighbors, ranging from concerned to outright judgmental. People were speculating about everything from illegal activities to, as Karen had originally implied, prostitution. I was livid. This wasn't just petty HOA politics anymore. Karen was systematically destroying my reputation in the community with a carefully orchestrated whisper campaign. Time for a little background about me that becomes relevant here. I'm not just any suburban resident. I spent 15 years working in corporate investigations before semi-retiring early thanks to some very successful investments. I have resources, connections, and most importantly, I know how to research people thoroughly and legally. Instead of confronting Karen directly this time, I decided to do what I do best: investigate. If she wanted to play games with surveillance and documentation, I could play too. And I played much better than she realized. I started with public records. Karen and Rick Mitchell had lived in the neighborhood for 8 years. Rick worked in pharmaceutical sales, traveling frequently for work. Karen had no outside employment but was heavily involved in various community organizations beyond the HOA. Then I moved to social media analysis. Karen was active on multiple platforms, constantly posting about her perfect life, her perfect marriage, and her perfect neighborhood. But social media tells stories people don't intend to tell if you know how to read between the lines. Rick barely appeared in any of Karen's posts despite being married for 12 years. When he did appear, it was always in group photos or staged family portraits, never candid moments. His own social media presence was minimal, but what was there was interesting. I spent the next few weeks conducting what I call passive observation. I wasn't stalking or trespassing. I was simply paying attention to publicly visible patterns, the same way Karen had been doing to me. The difference was that I knew what to look for. Rick's BMW left for work every Monday morning around 7 a.m. and returned late Friday evening. Standard sales territory schedule. But on Wednesdays, the car often returned by 3 p.m., only to leave again around 5 p.m. and not come back until very late. Karen's own schedule was revealing too. She left the house every Wednesday around noon, returning by 4 p.m. looking freshly groomed and carrying shopping bags from high-end stores that were nowhere near any of her usual errands. Wednesday seemed to be a significant day for both of them, with completely different routines than the rest of the week. I expanded my research. Rick's LinkedIn profile showed he covered a 3-state sales territory, but his company's website listed local offices in our city. Why would someone need to travel overnight for work when their company had a local presence? A little more digging through professional networks and public business registrations revealed something interesting. One of Rick's major accounts was a boutique medical practice that specialized in cosmetic procedures. The practice was owned by Dr. Amanda Reeves, an attractive brunette who, according to her practice's website, was recently divorced. Dr. Reeves lived in an upscale neighborhood about 20 minutes away. Her social media showed a woman who enjoyed fine dining, weekend getaways, and had recently started posting photos of expensive gifts from a special someone who was never shown in the pictures. I cross-referenced the timestamps on Dr. Reeves' posts with Rick's travel schedule. The correlation was remarkable. Every time Rick had an overnight business trip, Dr. Reeves posted about romantic dinners or weekend getaways with her mystery man. But here's where it got really interesting. I discovered that Dr. Reeves had a Wednesday afternoon opening in her appointment schedule specifically blocked for sales consultations. The appointment was a standing weekly occurrence that had been on her books for over 6 months. Meanwhile, Karen's Wednesday afternoon routine seemed to involve visits to a day spa, shopping, and lunch at an upscale restaurant. I found her credit card receipts from these establishments in the neighborhood's shared recycling bin. People throw away amazing amounts of evidence without thinking about it. The spa she visited specialized in couples therapy and relationship counseling. Karen was seeing Dr. Helen Morrison, a marriage counselor who, according to her website, helped women cope with marital difficulties and betrayal. So while Rick was having weekly sales meetings with his attractive client, Karen was seeking therapy for what appeared to be marriage problems, then covering her emotional distress with retail therapy and spa treatments. The timeline was perfect. Rick's affair had been going on for at least 6 months, coinciding exactly with when Karen had ramped up her harassment campaign against me. She was projecting her own marital insecurities onto her neighbors, creating external drama to distract from her internal pain. I felt a moment of sympathy for Karen. Discovering infidelity is devastating, and people cope with betrayal in different ways. But then I remembered the slideshow, the surveillance, the systematic destruction of my reputation, and my sympathy evaporated. Karen had chosen to deal with her husband's cheating by attacking an innocent neighbor. She had weaponized the HOA and the community against me because she needed someone to blame for her failing marriage. That was unacceptable. It was time for some creative justice. My plan was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its execution. I would give Karen exactly what she had been giving me, public exposure of private matters, but with the added bonus of actual evidence and truth. First, I hired a licensed private investigator to document Rick's affair properly. I needed professional-grade evidence that would stand up to scrutiny. Within 2 weeks, I had photographs, hotel receipts, restaurant reservations, and a comprehensive timeline of Rick and Dr. Reeves' relationship. Next, I researched the legal requirements for dissolving an HOA in our state. It turns out that if 75% of residents vote to dissolve the association, it can be disbanded entirely. All it takes is proper notice, a special meeting, and a simple majority vote. I also discovered something delicious in our HOA's bylaws that Karen had apparently forgotten about. Section 18.7 stated that any HOA officer could be immediately removed from office if they engaged in conduct that brought disrepute or embarrassment to the community. My third research avenue involved Dr. Amanda Reeves' medical practice. It turns out that medical professionals have strict ethical guidelines about relationships with vendors and business partners. The state medical board takes these violations very seriously, especially when they involve ongoing business relationships that could compromise professional judgment. Now came the fun part, execution. I scheduled a special HOA meeting using the emergency provisions that Karen herself had written into the bylaws. The notice went out to all residents, stating that there would be a discussion of leadership conduct and community standards, with a potential vote on association restructuring. Karen couldn't refuse to hold the meeting without violating her own rules, but she clearly sensed something was up. She called me twice asking for more details about the agenda, but I simply referred her to the official notice that followed all proper procedures. The night of the meeting, the community center was packed. Word had spread that something significant was happening, and residents who hadn't attended a meeting in years showed up with curious expressions and folding chairs. Karen opened the meeting with her usual fake smile and officious tone. "I understand there are some concerns about leadership that someone wishes to discuss," she said, looking directly at me. "I'm always open to feedback about how we can better serve our community." I stood up with a folder full of documents and a presentation remote. "Thank you, Karen. I think it's important that our community understand the full picture of recent events, particularly the surveillance and accusations that have been directed at various residents." I had prepared my own slideshow, but mine contained actual evidence rather than speculation and innuendo. Slide 1, I began, as Karen's face began to change from confident to concerned. "Our HOA president has spent considerable time and energy documenting the private activities of residents, including taking photographs of visitors, recording license plates, and making public presentations questioning residents' character." The slide showed screenshots of Karen's social media posts, her slideshow from the previous meeting, and a timeline of her surveillance activities. Slide 2 shows the impact of these activities on community morale and resident privacy rights. Several residents have reported feeling harassed and intimidated by this behavior. I clicked to the next slide, which showed quotes from neighbors who had been willing to speak up about feeling uncomfortable with Karen's tactics. Now, slide 3 addresses the question of community standards and how leadership behavior affects our neighborhood's reputation. This was where things got interesting. The slide showed a timeline comparing Karen's harassment campaign with some other activities that had been taking place in the community. It appears that while our HOA president was busy surveilling innocent residents, she was unaware of actual violations of community standards happening much closer to home. I clicked to the next slide, and Karen's face went completely white. The slide showed a photograph of Rick's BMW parked outside Dr. Amanda Reeves' house, with the date and time clearly visible. It was followed by hotel receipts, restaurant charges, and a comprehensive timeline of Rick's affair. It seems that while Karen was accusing others of improper conduct based on speculation, her own household was engaged in actual impropriety with documented evidence. The community center was dead silent except for the sound of several people gasping. Karen was staring at the screen like she'd been struck by lightning. Furthermore, I continued, this pattern of projection and misdirection represents exactly the kind of leadership that brings disrepute to our community. According to Section 18.7 of our own bylaws, such conduct is grounds for immediate removal from office. I clicked to the final slide, which showed the relevant bylaw text highlighted in bold letters. I'm therefore calling for an immediate vote of no confidence in our current HOA president, followed by a discussion of whether this association should continue to exist at all, given how it's been weaponized against residents. Karen finally found her voice, but it came out as a strangled whisper. You investigated my family? You hired someone to spy on my husband? I documented publicly visible behavior using the same methods you've been using against other residents, I replied calmly. The difference is that I found actual evidence of actual impropriety, rather than making baseless accusations about legitimate activities. The room erupted in whispered conversations as residents processed what they'd just learned. Some were staring at Karen with shock, others were looking at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. The real question, I continued, is whether we want to live in a community where leadership uses their position to harass residents while ignoring actual problems in their own lives. I propose we dissolve this HOA entirely and return to being a normal neighborhood where people mind their own business. Karen's mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water. She looked around the room desperately, but found no allies among the neighbors who had been hanging on her every word just months earlier. You can't just. She stammered. Actually, I can, I said, pulling out copies of the dissolution paperwork. I've already filed the preliminary paperwork with the state. If 75% of residents vote to dissolve tonight, we can be free of this organization within 30 days. The vote wasn't even close. 87% of residents voted to dissolve the HOA immediately. Karen was ousted as president by an even larger margin before the dissolution vote took place. But the coup de grace was still coming. As residents filed out of the meeting, many stopping to shake my hand or apologize for not speaking up sooner, Karen sat alone at the head table looking stunned and devastated. I approached her with one final document. Karen, I said quietly, there's one more thing you should know. I've forwarded all of this information to the state medical board for review. Dr. Reeves' relationship with Rick represents a potential ethical violation since his company is a vendor to her practice. Her medical license could be at risk. Karen looked up at me with horror. You're destroying their lives. I'm applying the same standard of scrutiny to actual misconduct that you applied to imaginary problems, I replied. The difference is that your husband's affair is real, documented, and actually violates both professional ethics and marriage vows. I placed the final document on the table in front of her. It was a letter from my attorney to Rick's employer, detailing how his affair with a client represented a conflict of interest that could expose the company to liability issues. I've also sent this information to Rick's sales manager. Apparently, using company travel budgets to conduct a personal affair while neglecting actual sales responsibilities is frowned upon in pharmaceutical sales. Karen stared at the letter, and I could see the moment when she realized the full scope of what I'd done. Her campaign of harassment and reputation destruction had been turned back on her with precision and devastating effect. Her husband's affair was now public knowledge in the community. His job was in jeopardy. His girlfriend's medical practice and professional license were under investigation. The HOA that had been Karen's source of power and identity was dissolved. And everyone in the neighborhood now knew that her months of moral grandstanding had been projection from someone whose own life was falling apart. Karen's face crumpled as the magnitude of her situation hit her. She'd started a war she couldn't win against someone who had better weapons, better training, and most importantly, actual evidence on their side. The look of absolute defeat and realization in her eyes was something I'd remember for years to come. "You've destroyed everything," she whispered. "No," I replied, gathering my papers and heading toward the door. "You destroyed everything when you decided to make my life hell to avoid dealing with your own problems. I just made sure everyone could see what was really going on." As I walked away, Karen remained frozen at that table, staring at the documents that detailed the complete collapse of her carefully constructed facade, finally understanding that she'd picked the wrong neighbor to mess with.